Kitty Genovese was a 28-year-old bartender who was robbed, essayed, and stabbed outside of her apartment building in the Kew Gardens neighborhood of Queens, New York. The New York Times published an article 2 weeks after Kitty's murder, claiming that 38 people had heard or saw the attack and did nothing. It became a very well-known case in the psychology textbooks for the next 4 decades. In 2016, the Times came out with another article about the case and admitting the original article was flawed and it grossly exaggerated the number of witnesses and what they had perceived. There's a lot going on with this case, so let's get into it.
Welcome to our channel, where we talk all things true crime. This video is for educational purposes.
Kitty's full name is Catherine Susan Genovese. She was born in Brooklyn, New York on July 7, 1935. Kitty was the oldest of 5 children, and she graduated of Prospect Heights High School and was well liked by classmates. She was remembered as a great student and voted class cut-up in her senior year. After Kitty's graduation, her mother had witnessed a murder, and this motivated the family to move. While her family moved to New Canaan, Connecticut, Kitty stayed in New York City working 2 jobs. She was a secretary at an insurance company and a bartender at night in Queens.
Kitty's life was going well. She had met her partner a decade later, Mary Ann. The two moved in together in the apartment in Kew Gardens. The neighborhood was considered safe and a peaceful area. On March 13, 1964, around 2:30 a.m., Kitty left the bar that she worked at and drove home. On her way, she stopped at a traffic light, and that is where her attacker, Winston Mosley, first saw her. Kitty arrived at her apartment at 3:15 a.m. She parked in the Kew Gardens, Long Island Railroad Station parking lot that was about 100 feet from the front door of the apartment building. It was also in an alleyway at the rear of the building. Mosley, who had followed Kitty home, parked at a corner bus stop. He was armed with a hunting knife. He quickly approached Kitty. Kitty noticed and ran towards the front of the building. It did not take long for Mosley to overtake Kitty and stabbed her twice in the back.
Startled by the attack, Kitty started screaming, "Oh my God, he stabbed me. Help me." There were several neighbors that heard her cries, but unsure if it was an actual cry for help. One of the neighbors, by the name of Robert Mosier, yelled at Mosley, "Let that girl alone." This scared Mosley away, and Kitty began to slowly make her way towards the rear of the building. She was seriously injured. Mosley was saw by witnesses fleeing in his car and driving away, only to return 10 minutes later. Mosley was hiding his face with a wide-brimmed hat. He was searching for Kitty in the parking lot, train station, and the apartment complex. Mosley spotted Kitty in the hallway at the back of the building. Kitty was barely conscious and unable to enter the building due to it being locked. The second attack on Kitty began.
Mosley stabbed Kitty several more times. He then essayed her and stole $49 from her. The attack lasted about 30 minutes. Kitty had cuts on her hands, suggesting that she had attempted to defend herself. Kitty's friend and neighbor, Sophia, found her shortly after. Sophia held Kitty in her arms until the ambulance arrived, telling Kitty help is on the way. Kitty's attacks occurred before New York City had the 911 emergency call system. The records of calls of the police are unclear, but they wouldn't have been given a high priority. One witness claimed that his dad had called the police during the first attack, reported a woman was beat up, but got up and was staggering around. After the second attack, another witness, Carl Ross, called his friends, asking them what he should do before finally calling the police. Unfortunately, Kitty died en route to the hospital.
Kitty was buried on March 16, 1964, in New Canaan, Connecticut. 3 days after Kitty's funeral, Mosley was arrested for suspected robbery. A detective recalled that Mosley's car looked a lot like the car that was reported by some witnesses to Kitty's murder. He then informed the detectives in charge of Mosley's case. During questioning, Mosley admitted to murdering Kitty and 2 other women. Mosley was married with 3 children and had no criminal record. Mosley gave a detailed account of Kitty's attacks. He told the detectives that his only motive was to simply kill a woman, saying he preferred to kill women because they were easier and didn't fight back. Mosley went on to tell the detectives that he got up around 2 a.m. while his wife was at work to drive around to look for a victim.
Mosley was charged with Kitty's murder, but not the other 2 killings that he had admitted to. Even after confessing to the detectives, Mosley pleaded not guilty, only to change his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. The judge and jury was not having it and found Mosley guilty. He was sentenced to death. When the verdict was read, Mosley showed no emotion, and there was some applause and cheering from spectators. The judge stated, "I don't believe in capital punishment, but when I see a monster like this, I wouldn't hesitate to pull the switch myself." In 1967, Mosley's death sentence was reduced to life imprisonment. He died in jail fell on March 28, 2016. He was 81 years old.
You say that you remember almost nothing of the murder?
The details of it, no.
It's sort of, the length of time when it was reconstructed was approximately 32 minutes. Is it a total blank?
I remember the street. I remember the act itself. But the details.
You remember the act itself?
Now that we know what happened, let's get into the original article that the New York Times published in 1964. The article titled 37 Who Saw a Murder Didn't Call the Police. It alleged that multiple neighbors of Kitty's either saw or heard the attacks, but did nothing to help. Kitty's case led to the coining of the bystander effect. This is a phenomenon within psychology that describes how people are less likely to help a victim when others are around. People assume that others will intervene, which relieves individual responsibility to act. In Kitty's case, it was reported that 37 neighbors were awakened by her screams. It was later discovered that 12 people witnessed her murder. No one intervened, and only 2 people called the police, which in our opinion is still a lot of people to have witnessed a murder and did nothing.
Like this street in New York City, if you were unfortunate enough to be the victim of a crime or taken ill unexpectedly, you might think that surrounded by all these people, someone would intervene. After all, isn't there safety in numbers? Psychologists say no. Research suggests that often a victim is less likely to receive assistance when surrounded by a group rather than a single bystander. When people are in a crowd, it's easier to pass the buck. It's what psychologists call the diffusion of responsibility.
It can be difficult to know how to act in this type of situation. The psychologist that named the bystander effect broke it down to 5 steps in the decision-making process. The steps are: 1. Notice that something is wrong. 2. Define the situation as an emergency. 3. Decide whether they are personally responsible to act. 4. Choose how to help. 5. Implement the choice helping behavior. This can be effected when others are present. When the numbers of bystanders increase, it decreases the likelihood that someone will step forward and help.
Kitty's murder inspired the creation of the Neighborhood Watch program and was credited as one of the factors that pushed for the 911 emergency system. After New York City joined in the national efforts, other cities joined as well. 911 became the national emergency number in 1968. So what do we think?
I have heard the backstory of this case without knowing any facts about it, if that makes sense. Basically, that a woman was attacked outside of an apartment building and multiple people. I've heard that story, however, I didn't know all the case facts.
Same for me. Just researching it, I didn't realize that there was an article from 2016 that disproven that there wasn't that many people, but I still think 12 people is a lot of people.
I was watching a documentary, and what they were saying was, although there were possibly 37 or 38 people that were awoken by it, it didn't necessarily mean that they had knowledge that it was an emergency, and that they believed the number closer to 12 or even half of that.
That actually knew she was being attacked.
That realized what was going on. You had that one guy upstairs that yelled at him to let her go during the first attack. It scared Mosley off.
Yeah.
So maybe he thought she was safe. It did take place in 3 different locations on the property, different attacks.
Yeah.
So maybe that neighbor was only able to visibly see that first attack and didn't realize that more had went on, but thought she was fine. And possibly the same for the other people that saw her walking off.
Yeah.
They thought. But at the same time, it's baffling that many people heard and saw something. And I get that 911 wasn't even a thing back then, but people called the police for things.
And only 2 people had
Only
called.
2.
And that it wasn't even given like a high priority. In another article, it pointed out that maybe because of the different areas that she was at, that when people saw it, they thought that was a first attack. They didn't know that all 3 things were happening at once. But it seems like if somebody is being stabbed, that they would have a certain scream. Someone is being...
There's blood-curdling screams.
Yes, like physically hurt. It's a distinct...
The stairwell that her neighbor came and held her till the ambulance got there, when she was in that stairwell, she was screaming for help up to the door there, and that neighbor who was home, I believe, was aware that she was down there screaming, and he did nothing.
Police called the police.
And maybe because we've grown up with 911, it's never been a thing to not call when people need help. Maybe we've been conditioned because we grew up with it.
Yeah. It's sad because she did nothing wrong, and Mosley even admitted he was already out driving around looking for a victim. And unfortunately, saw her first.
So he wasn't in there too long, but he escaped and he was out for 2 weeks, and he terrorized people, broke into their houses, essayed women.
Held somebody hostage.
Yeah, and then he was taken back in. The FBI agent that arrested him then made a comment that he was startled by the stature of him because he was a small man, which makes sense why he preyed. I mean, it doesn't make sense that he preyed on women, but his mindset was he picked victims that he knew he could overpower. They said he didn't have a motive. He just wanted to kill a woman.
Yeah. So it's just sad. He never showed any signs of remorse or anything like that from what I saw.
You know, we talked about the bystander effect and how it's a big thing in psychology. They go over that case a lot. I was kind of reading some information on it, and someone had mentioned if there's something that's going on that someone needs help, they said what you need to do is point to a specific person and say, hey, you in whatever color shirt, I need you to do this. So if one person will take action, then they have to call out individuals.
Like give direction?
Yeah, or they all just kind of stand there. And we were talking about this, all these videos online of all these kids fighting and stuff that I absolutely hate. All these teenagers, they're just standing around recording it. Mm-hmm. Nobody's stepping in to try to help. Nobody's calling the police. They're just recording it. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if this phenomenon known as the bystander effect is going on in these situations as well.
Because you're looking around to see, is somebody else going to step in? And then you just see them maybe recording or doing nothing. And you're like, oh, well, I'm not doing nothing. I'm not going to put myself out there and potentially get hurt.
What if you step in and it's not the right thing to do? They all just start following each other. No one steps up to lead.
I think it's like an uncertain thing. Because it seems like common sense that you would try to help somebody that was in need. You could at least call the cops.
Absolutely. Yeah, always call the police. When something happens, there's fight, flight, or freeze. Mm-hmm. You've got some people like joining in, whether it's just by recording the phone or being a part of it. Then you have people that just take off. They're like, I ain't being here. But then other people could possibly freeze. And there's fawning, you're passing out. So there is that one. Maybe it's part of that too.
Another thing is they might think someone else might know better how to help. It's hard to like really say, because again, people do freeze, I think, but it's almost like you would kind of look around, be like, hey, someone else, anybody, are you gonna do this?
Oh, well, maybe it's not that big of a deal because nobody else is freaking out, so maybe I'm just freaking out.
If something like that happens, obviously you'd be more apt to act if it's in your group. Then obviously your friends, family members would intervene on your behalf. So it could be more so on a stranger basis.
And they said that the less people around, the greater chance that you're going to get help.
Which is scary.
I believe that guy was on the 7th floor. So it's not like he could have got down there to help. So he did what he thought he could.
Mm-hmm. But if he could hear her on the 7th floor,
everybody could hear her.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he had his window open, but still,
I think
everyone
60s,
on the lower
they
level.
probably didn't run electronics like we do now.
No, and they probably didn't have as much noise pollution.
Yeah.
So have you heard of this case? Do you think it's kind of crazy that 911's only been around since 1968? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.